Welcome to Morning Devotion with Ken Gurley. Devotions designed to inspire you on your daily walk with God. Here's your host, Ken Gurley.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Monday morning, December 28th. We are in the last week of this dreaded year. We're going to say goodbye. We are going to say goodbye. Come on, let's covenant together. Blood brothers, covenant. We're going to say goodbye to 2020. Thank you. Thank you for making this year sweet, comforting, strengthening. Why don't you think of one word as you join in? What have these devotions and the company that we keep while we're doing these devotions, what have they meant to you? Welcome. Welcome. You make this special. Thank you for being a part of it. My thought today is go ahead and grieve, saying goodbye to 2020. I told you last week I'm going to be going through some thoughts this week to close out the year. So like the page, share the page, follow the page, and may the Lord bless you. I hope you had a wonderful holiday. Christmas is come and gone. New Year is upon us. We now stand in that unusual gap between the old and the new. The media will be filled with what they call the greatest stories of 2020. Who did what? Who succeeded? Who failed? Who was born? Who passed? Why this worked? Why this didn't work? On and on and on. And you either love that kind of stuff or you hate it. Yeah. Of late, I've been in the latter category, to be truthful. But for those of us that just feel like survivors of 2020, I think there's better uses of our time. We need to process what's happened. Yeah. We've been shell-struck, pounded, worn down by a year. It's time to process what's happened to us. Or put it another way, it's time to mourn or grieve. I was with a group of people recently. They were talking about significant passings of this year, and we started listing people we knew, those who had passed from the virus. We shared names of people, and we noticed something. We started asking, well, didn't so-and-so pass? And didn't so-and-so pass? We realized we haven't come close to identifying what's been taken from us. You can leave 2020 if you like a jackrabbit across the prairie. But I think we would be wise to slow down and to remember and to process and to think about what was taken from us in this year. As I speak today, would you do us all a favor? Would you write down names of people that meant the world to you, that are no longer with us, that were close to you, taken from you? If they were taken by COVID, go ahead and say that. If they were taken by something else, say that too. I just think it's time. I think it's time to take a moment and to grieve. I simply don't see any way that we can plan a meaningful new year without walking through the heartache of this difficult year. Who have you lost? What have you lost? Many of you have been through so many storms, natural, physical, spiritual, emotional. I can't say what all you've lost, but I know it's been a lot. It's been tough. And I guess what I'm saying is you, me, we've been marked and scarred by the year of 2020. Just as we heard parents or grandparents speak of life during the Great Depression, they spoke of that singular season for the rest of their lives. Much of the habits they had, much of the ways they handled money, their mannerisms, their sayings, what they did or would or wouldn't do were defined by that devastating time in their lives. We couldn't agree with them because we hadn't seen it, but we understood what they had lived through. And so too should we understand today that we are marked, but God sees where we are. But do we see where we are? Have we stopped? Have we taken a divine Selah, a pause, and said, wow, take a moment and process the loss and grieve, what could have been and perhaps what should have been. Because until you and me can place a rest in peace sign on this year, it would haunt us the rest of our lives. Thank you for sharing your losses. Thank you for encouraging one another. Go ahead and grieve, saying goodbye to 2020. Yes, today we wade through deep waters. A dark tide of 12 months swept us forward to the present. One of the more difficult things we have to deal with is believing that God is for us when we have suffered loss. It's a common thing found amongst the agnostic. It's not that they disbelieve in God, but if they did, they would say that God had disappointed them. Some deeply emotional transition occurred in their lives, some hurt, some sorrow, some devastating event. And in some way, that person believed God failed them. They believed God had let them down. He wasn't there when they needed them. And rather than believe in a God who disappoints, it's easier to simply say, I just don't believe in God. One student said that her mother attempted suicide. State stepped in, took the children in foster care. When the daughter prayed that God would reunite the family, God didn't answer her prayer. So she figured God was not real. And that's a lot of issues here. Unresolved hurts, unrecognized losses. Each must be faced. Each must be grieved. And only then do we realize He was there all the time, seeing us through. Go ahead and grieve. This week, in the 5 days of this week, we want to leave the old and welcome the new. And to do that, we've got to turn to the past of 2020 and say, let's get this resolved. We were taught, take it to Calvary, leave it there. When you've hurt someone, when you've failed someone, when you've committed to transgression, when you've trespassed where you didn't belong, you take those things to Calvary and you leave them there. But sin is not just what we do. Sin is what has been done to us. What do you do when others hurt you? Oh, you can make sure that no resentment gets in your heart and spirit. You can do your best to pray for those who hurt you. But what happens to the loss? How do you process the pain when you feel cheated, jilted, rejected, scorned, unloved, humiliated, ridiculed, abandoned, misunderstood? What do you do with the sin that is against you? All of these, so many more, they are losses that we've experienced in our past, that we have to do a loss inventory and list everything that has been taken from us. Go ahead, process it, grieve. You may say, I've tried. I thought I had until somebody said the wrong thing. And the moment they said the wrong thing, whoo, did I fly off at the handle. And we realize the hurt is still there, as fresh and as real as it was yesterday. Can I give you the modern word for it? The word we use to explain a biblical concept. It's called grief. In one large study of 10,000 people, respondents replied to a survey about grief and loss, and people, what they said was very, very interesting. 60% of them dreamt about a lost loved one. Only 7 in 100 felt it was completely true that they received adequate support from others. Nearly 30% felt alone with their grief most of the time. 13% said they felt alone in their grief all the time. And the authors noted, one of the hardest aspects of mourning is feeling that one's own grief is somehow not normal or has gone unrecognized. It was Henry Cloud who said, grief is God's cure for what isn't right. When you experience loss, you experience pain, you experience hurt, the only cure is grief, God's cure for what's not right. Grief is simply facing up to the loss and going through the delicate process of letting go. Someone who died, someone left us, someone hurt us. We have to begin to let go. and we grieve, and in our sorrow and in our hurt, in our unrecognized pain, God shows up. You've heard it said that the first stage of grief is denial, that overlooks a couple of initial stages like shock, disbelief. Those usually come before denial. I can't believe this is happening. So unreal, so surreal. Yes, long before you get to, why did this happen to me? You're just stunned. The news of a sudden passing, the news of a poor diagnosis, the shock of what am I to do with this? If these losses are not processed, if grief does not happen, then we end up with unresolved, unrecognized losses, and that's where denial begins to set in. We know that when a loved one passes, we experience deep sorrow. We get that. Grief is the price of having loved. Is this the same emotion and process we follow in other areas of hurt? To an extent, it is. Author Edgar Jackson poignantly described grief as grief is a young widow trying to raise her 3 children alone. Grief is the man so filled with shock, uncertainty, and confusion that he strikes out the nearest person. Grief is the mother walking daily to a nearby cemetery to stand quietly and alone a few minutes before going about the task of the day. She knows that a part of her is still in that cemetery, just as a part of her is in her daily world. Grief is a silent, knife-like terror and sadness that comes 100 times a day when you start to speak to someone who's no longer there. Grief is the emptiness that comes when you eat alone after eating with another for so many years. Grief is teaching yourself to go to bed without saying goodnight to the one who's passed. Grief is the helpless wishing that things were different when you know that they're not and never will be again. Grief is a whole cluster of adjustments, apprehensions, uncertainties that strike life in its forward progress and make it difficult to refocus, redirect the energies of our life. That's grief. That's recognizing that things will never be the same. While some are ready for 2020 to be over, I think we would be wise to say, I've sustained loss this year. Precious people, relationships, things have been taken from me. Yet is this the same emotion that we have for the things that don't work out? The people who let us down? The people who wronged us? Probably not to the same degree, but to a certain extent it is. And for those experiencing that now, I'm not going to give you platitudes. I won't try to soften the sorrow that you feel. Grief is not something you get over, but it is something you can get through. But you've got to pass through it. The death of a loved one in some way is like the death of a dream, the death of a season in your life, empty nest syndrome or career transition, death of a relationship, death of a plan, a failure, not gaining the love or approval of someone significant, not being the person you wish you could be, not getting what you had hoped for, loss of health, financial reversal in your life, death of anything you really craved, desired, set your heart on. I could say that grief is to be expected. Just buck up and get better. But does that really help you? Not really. Not at all. I could say, just ignore it. Go your feather way. But that doesn't help. I could say, you got to get through this. But does that really help you? No, it doesn't help you. But what I think helps is to acknowledge it, mention it, face it. Come face to face with my loss. That's the first step. And when you become aware of it, recognize the loss has taken place, then it's starting to connect the dots. The way I'm feeling now is because of the loss. Otherwise, we race through life living disconnected lives. It was a few years ago in my life that I experienced some huge losses. It was a story of one loss after another. I won't itemize the losses because that's not very helpful. But then it was important, very, very important, that I stopped and I acknowledged each loss. It'd be like an athlete not admitting they were hurt before the Olympics. How could they do their best? How could they get their head in the game? How could they do that? It'd be like a soldier not admitting that they were injured before going into battle or shell shock, PTSD. It would have huge ramifications later in the warfare. Be aware. Be aware. Second of all, accept reality. Accept it. And this is where the biblical words come in, like sorrow, broken heart, contrite, crushed. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and he saveth such to be of a contrite spirit. Psalm 147:3, he healeth the broken in heart and binds up her wounds. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your cares on him. He cares for you. There's a ministry there. There is a ministry. When Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted, there's a promise to the mourners. A promise, come unto me, all ye that are laboring and heavy laden, I will give you rest. Grief is not running from the loss, it's accepting the loss. Because only when the loss is accepted does the healing start to come. We repel anyone and anything who bring us down. We ignore things that are wrong. We run from the past. We run from hurts in the past. And when we do, we hide from our future. We put on our game face and we say, hey, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Nothing's wrong with me. World, you can't hurt me anymore. Family, you're not going to get to me. Nemesis, friend, former friend, frenemy, enemy, you'll never touch me. I have a sadness shield that is impenetrable. And we push God away. For God is near to the brokenhearted. Don't push him away. Until we let our grief, the cure for the wronged, to enter our lives, we'll never be whole. We will not have dealt with our past. Third, share the grief. And this sounds strange, but grief was meant to be shared. The hardest grief to bear is the one you try to carry alone. Yeah, share it with God. Admit the loss, the hurt, the betrayal, the disappointment. Go ahead and admit it. But then share it with others. Share it with others. This is one thing we've learned during this time. We actually needed each other in these morning devotions. I needed you. You needed me. We just needed to be here together through this season. How do we support people when they're in a time of loss? We can learn from the elephants. The elephants are known to grieve in groups. They loop trunks to support the bereaved. Like elephants, we got to get connected. Yeah. Grieving's not over when the funeral service is finished. God doesn't send waves of healing to the grieving. He sends people who bring healing. 1, 2, 3, coming to you saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm here. I'm here. And fourth and finally, heal. You and I have got to heal. In these last few days of the year, you see, that's what I'm seeing. We simply can't say goodbye to a year without taking time to grieve, noting the loss, sharing the loss, and finding help in God for this season. Yet, that's not where we are. Regrettably, we're upset, we're frustrated, maybe angry, maybe wanting to get back, somehow claw back what's been taken from us. But that's the language of the flesh. It's not any love language that I know. Vengeance is a lazy form of grief. It's grief in the slow lane. Learn to forgive. That's the mismatching experience of grace. That's what cures. That's what will heal the hurt. That's what will help you to start over January 1 of 2021. And isn't that what Calvary is? The ultimate mismatching experience, that the sinless died for the sinner, the guiltless rescued the condemned. And maybe that's the highest comfort we can receive while grieving, is that Jesus knows. He knows how we feel. This man of sorrow, he was acquainted with grief, and he experienced that in the sojourn of his flesh, and he did it all for us. So today, first day of the work week, we're going to be marching out of an old year soon and into a new year. But before you leave, go ahead and grieve. My prayers are with you. Share this one with another. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to Morning Devotion with Ken Gurley. Join us next time for another inspiring devotion. To support this ministry, please visit firstchurch.com/give.